Tonight we're in Epsom. Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Rory Stewart, recently appointed to his first cabinet post as International Development Secretary and a candidate for the Tory party leadership. An MP for more than 20 years, Labour's Shadow International Trade Secretary Barry Gardiner, Joe Swinson, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Alex Phillips, former head of media for UKIP, elected this week as an MEP for the Brexit Party, and Harvard Professor of Psychology, international author, who argues that despite all the challenges of the planet, we've never had it so good. Steven Pinker. Welcome to our panel, to our audience here, and of course to you at home. You can argue along in the usual way using hashtag BBCQT on Facebook, on Instagram and on Twitter. It's been quite a week since we were last on. The Prime Minister's resigned. Several Tory leadership candidates are out of the starting blocks. We've got one right here. And we've had the results of the EU elections. I think there's a lot to talk about, don't you? Let's get on with our first question, which comes tonight from Aidan Duddy.
Is electing a new Conservative leader like changing the captain of the Titanic after it had struck an iceberg?
You're chortling away, Barry. Do you want to kick us off?
Well, look, I don't want to intrude in private grief in the Tory leadership contest. You have to wonder, given that the arithmetic doesn't change in the House of Commons, what will actually change by a new leader? And look, I think if you look back at what happened last week, I've certainly learned a couple of things from the election results that we had then.
What did you learn?
I would say the first thing I learned is that clarity, whether right or wrong, beats a complex message every time. I think.
And do you think Labour's message isn't clear? Lots of your very senior.
Yeah, look, I think that what we did is we went in there with a complex message, and we were, I think, right. It was an honourable thing to try and say, look, we will try and have a compromise, negotiate a deal, and if we can get that through, then that will enable us to respect and honour the referendum result.
So should Jeremy Corbyn change the message now, Barry?
Well, look, I think what you've seen in the past few days is precisely that.
Have we?
What we've said is...
What is the message now?
Well, the message now is that we have to move to the final phase of the composite motion that we had at party conference last year. And that was very simple. It said, look, you must try and deliver. You must try and negotiate and get through a deal in Parliament that can actually succeed in delivering. We've tried in good faith to do that. We haven't been able to. And I think that means we must now move to the second phase, which is, we always said, we would, in order to stop a no deal, that we would go back to the people.
So have a second referendum?
Well, or in a general election. And actually, I think the real question around the Tory leadership, sir, is this. Who can they elect who can avoid a general election within a year? Because most Conservative MPs do not want a general election. Let's be clear about that. They're very fearful of a general election. But in order to get the Tory leadership, many of those people think that they have to promise to commit to a no deal. And if they do that, the likely arithmetic in Parliament would be to stop a no deal because of the damage it would do to jobs and the economy. And that would most likely, the easiest way to stop that, or it's not easy, but the way of stopping that is through a vote of no confidence in the government, which certain Tory MPs have actually said they would support in order to block a no deal. I thought it was very significant that Philip Hammond, actually on the Today programme, actually had adopted Labour Party policy. He said that he, that a second referendum or a second people's vote might be necessary in order to stop no deal. So that's the real question for the Tory leadership.
Okay.
Who can avoid a general election this year and successfully negotiate through?
Joe, elect a new Conservative leader like changing the captain of the Titanic after it struck the iceberg?
Well, I think both Labour and the Conservatives hit icebergs last week, if we're honest. But, I mean, I think the analogy is, in some ways, a good one for this reason. We're looking at this through the prism of the Tory leadership contest, and actually we should be looking at it through the lens of what is in the national interest. And, you know, the iceberg, the disaster that we're heading towards, is about what happens to our country. Now, Rory aside, most of these Tory leadership contenders have been merrily talking about going for a no-deal Brexit, as if that is something that should be considered or contemplated by any responsible politician. And we see this through a who's up, who's down. It's like some kind of episode of 15 to 1, you know? This is not a game show. It's not a scenario where all is at stake is, you know, whether you win the prize or get a pat on the back by Noel Edmonds and go home empty-handed. We are talking about a scenario where our economy loses £140 billion, where we have threats to our security, and where our NHS is undermined in a no-deal Brexit. A doctor came to see me and told me about the plans that were in place, and his concern, working in nuclear medicine, that despite all of the fridges that Matt Hancock has boasted that we're now the world's biggest buyer of fridges because of how many medicines we have to stockpile, despite that, for those nuclear medical products that have a short half-life, the queues at the Channel Tunnel at Dover are going to mean that fewer procedures for cancer diagnosis and treatment are going to be able to be undergone. This is what we're talking about.
Okay.
And I think it is entirely irresponsible the way most Conservative leadership contenders are going about it.
Well, Alex, I'm going to come to you on this in a moment. I just want to ask you, Joe, since we've got you and we're talking about leadership, you've been dodging questions all week about whether you're going to stand for the leader, to be leader of the Liberal Democrats. I might as well ask you tonight, are you going to stand?
Yes, I am going to stand to be leader of the Dem.
You heard it here first, folks.
I'll set out my plans tomorrow, but I happen to think that this country is crying out for a Liberal movement that will challenge the forces of nationalism and populism, and the Liberal Democrats need to be at the heart of that movement, and I'm the person to lead it.
Alex, the question was about the Conservative leadership. Obviously, you've heard what Joe had to say about no deal.
Yeah, I mean, look, actually no deal is the de facto position we're in now, come the 31st of October, and that is the net result of prevarication and politicking in Westminster. In fact, what Brexit has done is shine a spotlight on our domestic politics, on the nature of our democracy, and what we have seen, really, is the two establishment parties spend more time focusing their agenda against the other, trying to figure out how they can create longevity for their particular political brand and not longevity of democracy in this country. Now, going back to no deal, you know, the sort of apocalyptic situation that Joe paints, she better be careful, someone might take her to court. That's a bit of a joke. But look, the point is this. The referendum was about leaving the EU and all of its institutions. It was very simple. That's what we should have done. And it should be in the PM's gift, the next PM's gift, to stick to that. A lot of contingency planning has taken place. The European Commission and Whitehall have already done a lot to make sure that if that scenario comes to pass, then we will be prepared. And as a G5 nation, I'm sorry, with only 5% of our businesses in the UK trading directly with the EU, we should be able to do this. We absolutely should be able to do this. It will take political will on both sides, but I'll tell you this as well. Europe is about to face a banking crisis. Our economy is with 19 member states. It's not in their interests to create some sort of punitive Brexit. Yes, they need to sort of try and scare Britain into not doing, you know, not leaving the customs union and having completely free and fair trade with the world, which would undermine their own protective system. They have their own agenda, of course.
But Alex, let me just ask you this. When you look at the results of the EU election last week, and I've seen lots of people from various parties saying it tells them that the thing that they're doing is right and they need to do more of it, the Brexit Party included. But when you look at the results, and there's been a lot of analysis of it, it shows it was more or less a draw.
Yeah.
So what makes you think the Brexit Party is the party with the answer, when you've got at least half of those who voted anyway
the
thinking it
answer's
isn't the
already
answer?
been given. That's the thing, the answer's been given, because the question
Well, no, the question on the referendum was not no deal, or a deal, or all permutations. It was just in or out of the EU.
Yeah, and actually, in and out of the EU, out means out of the institutions and out from under its jurisdiction. The hard and soft Brexit dichotomy is a false construction.
Alex, is Norway in the EU? Is Norway in the EU or out of the EU?
But Norway wasn't in and then left.
Is it in it or out of it?
Norway has its special
Norway
arrangement,
is
and
not
Norway is
in
part
the
of EFTA.
EU. It's not in the EU, but it is part of the single market. Is Turkey in the EU or out of it?
Well, it's not in the EU, we know that.
Yes, but it has a customs arrangement with the EU that is a customs union.
But the point is...
So the point is that you cannot simply... And this is the big swizz that's gone on. People like you have actually said what you voted for when you voted to leave the EU was no deal, when in actual fact at the time what people were told was they would be leaving the European Union, which means leaving the two treaties of the EU. It means not having a seat on the Council, not having a commissioner, and not sending people like yourself, members of the European Parliament, to the European Parliament.
How is Shadow International Trade Secretary...
That is what leaving the EU actually means. You have tried to persuade, and I think successfully tried to persuade many, many people that it means what you want it to, which is to leave both the customs union...
everybody else has been doing,
OK, well, tell you what, let's hear from the audience. There's lots of hands up. The man here in the front.
It's amazing that we pick on the Tory party all the time. I admit they're in disarray. But
They are the government.
Yeah, but wait, they might be the government. But then do you remember when we had the referendum vote of whether to stay in or come out? That wasn't it amazing? On those buses, the Liberals, the Conservatives and the Labour Party were all getting on separate buses. Now, they were divided. We had some of them all together and they were all good friends. So why is it now that, all right, the government's getting blamed? But I feel that the Liberals and the Labour Party and all the other parties are just as much to blame, because when they were given a free vote, you know, they said, forget what Theresa May's trying to put through. Let's have about 8 votes on various alternatives. And they couldn't even come up with one. You as politicians should be disgusted because you're not doing, or we should be, because you're not doing your job, what we asked you to do 2.5 years ago.
All right.
I think it's pretty certain that we're not going to get another deal, and even if we did try and get a deal, it'd be another 2 years and we'd be an embarrassment to the whole global community. And I feel disappointed in Labour because I know it's divided, but they can either back no deal or a referendum in my eyes. That just not making a decision just doesn't do anything for you. And why can't you just make a decision? A lot of your party members want another referendum, so why won't the leadership do it?
Okay. Can I respond to that?
Briefly, because we've heard a lot from you, and there's two people who haven't got a word in edgeways so far.
I understand that frustration, but I think when you're confronted with a false dilemma, what you try and do is you try and steer a course that doesn't accept any of the falsehoods that you're being given. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to bring the two parts of our country together. That was an honourable thing to do. Unfortunately, we failed. Now, you say, well, in that case, let's go to a second referendum. We don't have in the opposition the votes in Parliament to insist on that. We can't introduce legislation.
Your support would be
but it's part now of our policy that we would say absolutely, if we can get a second referendum, and I voted for it in those votes, those indicative votes, as did most of my party. We voted for that in the indicative votes. And what we're saying now is we have to now be in that position where we say we have to go back to the people on this. I would prefer a general election to do it, because I think that's the only way in which we actually have the tools in Parliament to get those votes and do it.
OK. It's interesting so many questions being directed towards Barry. Of course, as Barry points out, he's not in government. Rory, let's just go back to the original question for a moment. Is electing a new Conservative leader like changing the captain of the Titanic after it struck an iceberg? So what's the point of this leadership campaign and all your walking around the country and talking to people and filming on your mobile phone?
Well, I think the analogy that strikes me is that this is a very